All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. I am Beyond Baroque's Executive Director, Quentin Ring. Hello. It's nice to see everyone. It's Friday night, and we're here with Mark Irwin and Elena Karina Byrne for a reading that we're calling Orphans and Other Strangers. This is going to be a little bit of a reading in dialogue, so we have them both up here at once at the same time. I wanted to start, however, by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielina Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their land. And as an arts organization, Beyond Baroque is committed to uplifting Indigenous writers, communities, and their art. As many of you know, Beyond Baroque is a space for everyone dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language. We're a space for writers, artists, readers, and above all, poets. We have a full slate of readings and workshops coming up. Tomorrow afternoon, in fact, we have poetry in non-English, a multilingual poetry reading. And then later tomorrow evening, we have the book launch for Carol Davis's new book. That's a great book. I'm looking forward to that. And in the coming weeks, we've got a whole slate of programming. We have next Friday, we have a program featuring poetry with some live jazz. That should be great. Later in April, we'll have California's newest poet laureate, Lee Herrick, along with a number of other readers. Later in April, we'll also feature Jackie Osherow and Lynn Thompson. And we're going to finish next month with the second annual Los Angeles International Poetry Film Festival. So I hope you'll come back for that. Beyond Baroque also offers a number of workshops. One I just want to highlight is during April, we have 30 and 30, which is a 5-week poetry workshop with Brendan Constantine. That'll be held online. That should be really a lot of fun. It's a very popular workshop, so please sign up for that if you're interested. And check out our website for all kinds of other readings, workshops, art exhibits, and community gatherings.
Are you going to be at the LA Times Festival of Books?
We will be at the LA Times Festival of Books. Elena is the organizer of the poetry stage. So Beyond Baroque that weekend, yes. It's a lot of work to organize that too, so it deserves a round of applause. We will be there as well during the festival. We'll have a booth. And,
Which is the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd.
Yes.
Or the 21st if you come to the awards ceremony. I'm
glad you can remember that because my dates in my head, it's like my calendar's mush in my head right now. At USC, yeah. But please also do show your support of our programming by becoming a member or renewing your membership if it's lapsed. We do depend on our members' donations to underwrite all of our programming. It helps keep programs like this free. Sometimes we do have to charge. If we do have to charge, you'll still get in for free as a member. It starts as little as $60 for the individual membership. $80 is a dual membership. There's levels above that. You can give us $1 million. We'd appreciate it. But a big thank you to all of you who are members, and a thank you also to our staff who have worked on this program: Jimmy Vega, Ivan Salinas, Eric Alberg, Dan McNay, Genesis Perez. They keep this place going, and I'm very grateful to them. Tonight, we have two of our very favorites, as I said, Mark Irwin and Elena Karina Byrne. They're just two of LA's finest poets, and I really sort of like their proposal for this evening. We do a lot of reading, so I always like it when we sort of switch it up a little bit. They're going to be reading in dialogue. Mark is celebrating a new book, Joyful Orphan, excuse me.
Everyone's joyful.
Oh, be happy. And we also have Elena's book, her most recent. We have it for sale in the bookstore, If This Makes You Nervous, as well as several of her other titles. To tell you a bit more about each of them. Elena Karina Byrne is a freelance editor, lecturer, programming consultant, and poetry stage manager for the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, as you heard, and literary programs director for the Ruskin Art Club. She's a Pushcart Prize and Best American Poetry recipient, and her 5 collections include If This Makes You Nervous, No Don't, Squander, and The Flammable Bird, as well as Mask. Her poems, reviews, and interviews can be found in Poem a Day, Plume Poetry, the Paris Review, the Detroit Journal, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and several other publications. And Elena is currently writing screenplays while contemplating her collection of hybrid essays entitled Voyeur Hour, which I'm very excited to have come out.
Yeah, it's been that poor thing has been dragged along for many years. Hopefully, I'll get it done.
Mark Irwin is the author of 11 collections of poetry, including Joyful Orphan, of course, Shimmer, A Passion According to Green, American Urn Selected Poems, and Bright Hunger. Recognition for his work includes the Nation Discovery Award, 2 Colorado Book Awards, 4 Pushcart Prizes, the James Rye Poetry Award, the Philip Levine Prize for Poetry, and fellowships from the Fulbright, Lilly, and NEA. He has also translated 3 volumes of poetry. It is always a joy to host both of them on this stage. They are not Joyful Orphans. They're very much part of our family here at Beyond Baroque. So please welcome Mark Irwin and Elena Karina Byrne.
So can you hear us? Does that sound good? So this is going to be fun, I hope. Elena and I are pals. First, I want to just say that what makes a great city is a reading series and a bookstore, a reading series with an exhibition gallery, and that of course is what Beyond Baroque has. And it's not just Venice; it's all of LA now, I think, and I think all of us have to recognize that. So, this is Elena's wonderful book, If This Makes You Nervous. I love this William Wegman. If you remember, he had the famous Weimaraner named Dan Ray, who he would throw ping pong balls to, and he would drop them in cups, and Bill Wegman took pictures. But what I love about Elena's book is how she's archived all these incredible artists, and not just archived them, but given them voice. People like Rachel Whitered, Andy Goldsmith, Sophie Kahl, Andrew Wyeth, Gerhard Richter. The list goes on and on. So it's really a joy to read with her. And that said, how would you characterize your book?
So people usually call it an ekphrastic book, but it's it's obviously not strictly ekphrastic. So just going back, thinking about how I've always structured my books, I always want to try something different, and having some sort of almost artifice or organizing principles really help me, because I get I love doing research. I get very passionate about sort of the focus of one thing, and so I decided that I wanted to make an homage to my childhood, because I grew up with artists and immersed in contemporary and conceptual art. In fact, this William Wegman photograph, 1973, tied on and tied off and one tied on, was a poster in my brother's wall when I was a kid. And a lot of the artists in here I also was lucky enough to witness when I was a young child. But so, it already informed so much of my being a poet. But in any case, the poetry basically falls under the category of like how, to find a new vantage point perspective and how to translate the experience of not only the artist, but I decided to, in many of the cases, to include early childhood experiences, especially preteen experiences, to sort of make those two things dialogue. So when you hear an artist, it's about the general artist's work. Not very often am I addressing a single work of art. That's about it. Do you want me to start? You want me to start?
You were going to ask me.
Oh, okay. No, that's right. We're going to do the interview first, right? So, okay, and now I get told of your book. There we go. And I would like to know how you characterize this collection, because I think we all address our collections differently, and I noticed there are a lot more prose poems in this book. And a lot of my students will ask, well, is that sort of the chicken or the egg thing? Did you feel like that the prose poems, the idea came first, or was that sort of a way of expressing something that was being dialogued throughout the book? Because there's just it's about approach, and it's about the voice and what happens. It's not just about manipulating it on the page, but it's about sort of a
Right.
condensed experience.
About the form, so I occasionally, there's this quote of Giacometti's I love, in art, form is the true obsession. And so, it's about putting pressure, how much pressure you can put on the subject matter. I think you do that very well too. So if I had to characterize my book, I guess I would say it's a watchful book, watchful in the ways that we're made orphans through global warming, through habitat extinction, through the pandemic, through the internet, electronic communication. But also, I think there's personal poems about loss, domestic poems. Sometimes the greatest losses are very small ones that keep accumulating.
Yeah.
So would you read?
Yeah, I think so much of all poetry is about elegy, and I'm going to include the Kurosawa quote that the role of art is not to look away, which I think hopefully we're both doing. So Rachel Whiteread is a poet from, an artist from England who casts negative space. And this was the first poem that I wrote in the series way back, I think in 2017 or 18. And I was really fascinated with that because she would cast the underside of a table or a chair. She would even cast an entire room. So she was, very interested in that, and she did a lot of work with boxes as well. And so that was what triggered this, because at the time I was thinking about how much my half-sister's death informed my preteen years. Rachel Whiteread, it's so you could almost lick those sugar cubes stacked in sleep. Find the hexahedron arc floating today's ocean, missing its human animal, leaving home. Grief is an impression of a missing table under the table, a body departed, withdrawn from the body, floating, the color of Halloween candy wrappers. I lived a whole afternoon under the leftover houseboards in our dying garden after my one sister died. Half-sister, half-death of my thinking about death at 9. A black hole can be measured by the sheer speed of what is orbiting around it. If you withdraw one object from its space in a room, measure what's left, all the empty parts, you have a child inside a box thinking outside itself.
I love the Halloween candy. It makes the poem scarier for me. So I'm going to kind of answer that with a poem that's an elegy. And the inception of this poem was a friend of mine died, and I received a letter from her about a week later, and I purposefully didn't open the letter for almost a year because it was like keeping this person alive. It's wonderful the way we deceive ourselves. Letter. Oh, and I should say at the end of this poem, there's the Malaysian word for tiger, which is macan, M-A-C-A-N. Letter. Times when we touch hope like the hem of a cloud, just as when we touch a body or door, or think of the dead come back romancing us through the warp of memory, lighting away by luring. And that's why sometimes I'll walk far saying is and was over and over until their sibilance becomes the fuse of all I know. Yes, you might ask, Where was I when the world laid out its dimensions? The dead chimp at the zoo, how the other chimps gathered around, and one laid a creased hand on its forehead, as if taking the temperature of the land. A grief arriving from millions of years, like a letter we keep trying to open, or Mary's letter I found in the mail, returning from a long trip after she had died, and how by not opening it for weeks, she remained alive. And then her words arriving through the white folds like blood from a cut. Vivid consonants, vowels combining as if from cells dividing, life hovering, and then nothing but the wound, words. And I remembered how the Javanese do not utter the word macan, tiger, after dusk, for fear of waking its presence.
Yeah, I think grief never goes away. It just transforms. And collective grief, as you mentioned. So I think I'll read my Andrew Wyeth poem, A Walkabout in Andrew Wyeth's painting. Before the squall hit, before 5 bodies' weight in boulders were thrown from the breakwater, we stood at the window. We lay calm on wood-colored beaches. Dreams don't sink children with the ship. Ships carrying other languages are found empty atop mountains in far countries. After giving her directions, I watched a car the color of dusk hit the woman crossing our street, and she sank at once as if into a hole. I carried that hole in my stomach for years. A sinkhole, also known as a swallow hole, a doline caused by some depression, by some form of ground collapse. In the 60s, TV was filled with them on islands as quicksand and as men's mouths, immolations, fires, cadmium in the midst of protest. Films of ditches, war holes, numberless graves unaccounted for. Running before a storm's roiling, I learned to jump wide spaces, roof to roof, and I believed in the wet black head of a horse who breathed desert clouds over my sleeping body. A child can be anyone, where sea waves can look like blown wheat, leveled by wind. At her end of the day, the long walk's wilderness rests.
So more grief. I'm going to read a sonnet in blank verse called The Dead. Yes, it's like this. You are walking in a field, and the field's gathered by a few trees that become a sun-splintered woods. And then after your father staggers in the yard, a mother goes, perhaps nursed long by a sister at home. The woods become forest, and when that lover first kiss beneath a fire escape's trellis pattern on West 45th Street dies in Paris, those spruce grow taller as you see again the 5 oranges spilled from her bag, rolling across the green carpet, where you both crawled, mute animals, in that room grown wider by grasp, more desperate now in memory, in this steep shadow, where those oranges, minus the one shared, carol on briefly, eating darkness, making a shell of burnished light, where you can kneel again and begin to listen, hungry again for those raw, pressed sounds to make the dark shine.
I just want to hear you.
I want to hear you.
Beautiful. So here's another one that's addresses a little more of the collective loss that we're feeling for so many reasons. There's one word in here, an entumbra, that's part of the moon's shadow, that extends beyond the umbra. It is similar to the penumbra in that the sun is only partially blocked by the moon. So it's just basically a kind of shadow on the moon. And otherwise, I think everything's clear. Style of imprisonment. Diane Arbus predicted this virus. And there's an epigraph by Diane Arbus. The scrutiny has to do with not evading facts. She worked her way into the winter's dyad sideshow of homeless tents and full metal shopping carts tipping their amidship cloth sails. To the next passerby wearing my same shirt, I said, go and goad the drunkalogue. Be dissonance like dropping your unbelted pants at the movies. An act of betrayal will get you an ignored corpse in the creek's icebox scene, smiling for no reason. Since I couldn't be dead honest with myself between rooms, since words themselves act as deeds, unwilling to break bread for birdsong, the paradox skin still shines in the same direction. But hardwired we are after the warfare referendum before Venus de Milo held her river hair sexed down, an outcast of blown-on beauty I once saw in the cruelty of schoolgirls against girls. How shells and coffee grounds share a planter's home soil. Bodies flux asphyxia suffering, for instance. For stakes of blame. The last photograph you saw shows a suicide shrug, shoulders bare, and a virus blur in both eyes. Even Jane Mansfield's hair bow and my doctor's Venice bird mask hung for one cousin plague are not alone. It's her best shot at showing we're freaks alike, where nature mirrors our bathroom life and sets fire to itself in the heat.
So we're improvising a little now. So I'm taking off from Venus de Milo, and I'm going to read a poem about a sculpture that I love, Nike of Samothrace. So I always have loved the poem of Rilke's The Archaic Torso of Apollo. Of course, because it's headless. And of course, the paradox of that with silence and is very powerful. But I wanted to write about a woman, and so there, if at the Louvre, for me, the Louvre Museum in Paris, most beautiful pieces of art there is the Nike of Samothrace, which is you go from the first floor to the second floor, the Daru staircase, and she's up there, and she's also headless, winged, and it becomes it's a very unsettling metaphor, Nike of Samothrace, because she was stolen by a French archaeologist, Charles Champoiseau, and taken to France in the mid-1800s. So she becomes a metaphor for, the shadow of colonialism, but also capitalism with, Nike shoes and things like that. And so because there had been so much written about Apollo and, Apollo, who of course had a touch of Harvey Weinstein in him, more than a touch. I'm thinking of the Bernini, Daphne and Apollo, where it's not just his hips, that's where they freeze it, of course, that he probably grabbed. So I wanted to write this poem about a powerful female, headless female. Nike of Samothrace. Her fish scales, her chains, the woman's headless wings, and blown tunic of Parian marble, the wet see-through camisole. By sea she's arrived, lighting on the ship's prow, one leg thrust forward, the draped sails of robes. Somewhere near between defeat and prayer, a drive-by shooting, the candy thrown around the body, the ambulance. They stole the dead girl's dog, while far away outside Jakarta in sweatshops, some work for 20 cents an hour. And there's one with his mouth taped shut in sunlight. From a sanctuary, she was unearthed and taken to the Louvre, where on the Grand Deru staircase she stands, stolen, moving in several directions at once.
I was tempted to read my Bernini poem, but I think I want to read my Nan Golden poem. And I don't know if you know about this documentary, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, that just came out. She was an also early avant-garde artist and incredible photographer, known to explore LGBT subcultures and queer and conventional relationships in all its dioramic forms. And also intimacy through an undisturbed grace, as they call it. Most notably, her hard look at HIV and AIDS, and also her very successful protests. Well, successful depending on how you look at it, because I don't think they removed their names from all the museums, but the Sackler family, who created OxyContin, give a lot of their money, and as she washes their money by giving their money to museums. And so it's a really impressive documentary. It's called The Beauty and the Bloodshed.
They did remove them from a lot.
Sorry?
They did remove their names from a lot of museums.
Oh, well, that's good to hear.
In London.
See, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Victoria and Albert, Serpentine, and in here.
Yeah. As they should, yeah. It's an amazing documentary, and it's an amazing weave. Speaking of weaves, between her relationship to her art and her identity, and then also these other things that are going on that and she had a very personal relationship because of it, because she lost her sister. So this is called and I wrote this 2020. Nan Golden fucks with 2020 mirrors. As if ambiguity's on-site workload whistle caught us in the act of climax, breathing like oars dragging the cold slick water back. Breathing over the skin, caught staring in on the face, just long enough to know this. No street creed corner divides the asphalt from fault, and into final dirt no male from female. As if this country's added lack of empathy, ours, didn't already add up to my funeral of nail clippers, police peel, and violent laughter's perfume bottles. Left bedside, where one quarter horse half sleeps in his musk. These limits of grief can't be stopped or looked at for long in the eye. Why, I'm no one's fallen apple wearing her rind green dress. I forget how to see the unwashed moon declaring my ex-husband's dirty water tail. I'm over an overkill silence. The sex minutes turn into a still life void. Another woman's face at a price. Nobody's business that their features are sleeping inside my horse's body now, made up of water, oiled bath wash, having no single declaration expression left to drain. This might yet have me here, laid bare, trapped in parsimony and still pleading for fruit.
Protest. I'm going to respond to protest. So this poem is called Vertigo, and one thing I like to do in my poems is mix different spaces, like religious spaces, philosophical spaces, animal spaces. And I think I got that from teaching at an art school. I'm sure I did. Vertigo. The way a good sentence makes light all along the page, the way a topo map holds sky. I said, the ant looking down from that piece of apple at its swarming kin. I said, the president looking down on the broken mob. The table holds parts of a life. Even that old wasp nest appears to be drawn in pencil. Its vacant cells resemble the abandoned buildings in so many cities. I like to touch its paper shell. The wind likes to budge it around. There are friends whose names I write now, lighter and lighter in pencil. Just as in the beginning, there's the egg having, quartering, eighthing. Just as in the end, the draining of color. But if you climb high enough on any invisible ladder, the falling will be a floating down. After her mother died, she kept blowing up balloons till the small bedroom was filled and she could no longer move. Thus, cells in the body. Thus, schooling fish. Thus, boots on the ground and soldiers marching. Inside every door, thousands of hands opening. Chance favors those in motion. The female cow followed the red trailer, the one taking her calf to market, all the way to the property line. And in that bellowing, a new frontier of language. And I sensed the way words can become a net of being. Morning, the brook trouts leap, carrying all the luck of light, its brief tattoo on the lake. And the wasp nest blew off the table, and parts of one city collapsed into the ocean, and the balloons drifted all over the house, and the girl opened closet after closet until she found only one with grass, cows, and a lake. The trees kept tamping down.
I like that wild one. Trying to think what would go with that. How much time do we have? How are we doing?
We have about 10 minutes. How about the Sophie
Okay.
Kai?
Yeah, I don't pronounce properly because I never spoke French. French artist, also really amazing. One of my favorites of her projects is she'd follow people around the streets and took notes on what they did. And she also interviewed blind people, asking them to describe color and various other things.
And
of
her
that
red
nature.
telephone on the bridge in Paris.
Oh my God! And so many of her projects, she's quite amazing. She's definitely one of my heroes. Sophie Calais, now take care of yourself. So Pain is Exquisite is her title, by the way. I just wove it into the text. No one gets to be happy here unless happy means pain is exquisite. Follow us to the animal bedroom, all the way to the drive-through chapel and walkabout child fairy tale day hour it takes to become a stranger, where you can't see you, your hand on the heart like a small anvil, where mothers will make mistakes, politicians appear speaking from sea trash and border wires, mounting meshed lingo. There will be a money jar, pink hot water bottle, one duck handle umbrella gun waiting for you. What fathers take can make gunpowder snuff for the blind. But come here anyway, to this continent in a floating wardrobe boat. Follow the past to its missing solitude. This is where you will weep from your eyes only, making no sound, as if all along your voice voyaged away from the cage, far from your body.
It's a beautiful one. I like it. I think I will read one called All the Tiny Arrows. This poem's actually in the New American Poetry Review. How the future's already veering toward yesterday. We are such acrobats of the moment. When the dam's floodgates broke, the fishermen thought about going back for their cars, but running uphill watched them float downstream. Or the guest, after being invited to dinner, insists that the host come to his house instead. The host hit by a car en route, head injury, and 3 years later dies of a stroke. It's not so much the one arrow of time, but all the tiny arrows shot at once that confuse. Unlike the tadpole morphing into frog, there's a choice at each moment. In the sky's black expanse, a puff of wind seems to come after each brief comet, and the mind is cleared of its weather, a dead friend. And I think how some poems are like a good suicide. You can't know too much before you start, but follow each rueful second blossoming toward deeper shades of gray, like a photo underexposed in the dark room. And I'm developing it now, the one of the dead friend. And then I will frame it, place it in shadow on a dark wall, where sometimes a light bulb will lob its dusk around till they resemble snow clouds or a leaping animal. And now someone screams, for it's from that wind that all words come, as we keep moving, unsure, through the jumbling debris of moments, until each of us becomes the one who enters memory, the one who has no age.
Mm-hmm. Wow. No age. At age 6, Marina Abramovich began living with her parents. It's true. And I, wanting a live white mouse, not a false rabbit fur one hung by its tail from the pet store to be dragged by her cat's claws in a double death ritual across our carpet, began wearing boys' clothes, digging yard dirt with a severed doll head, cut my jeans on wire, and climbed between backyard teeth of broken fences, crashed my bicycle for my brother's friends, shoved my fist full laughing into my mouth. You can enjoy the replay and you can push your body to do things, creating one bellow blown burst of light in the brain, biting your lip blue to feel the heart pulse down to its left wrist, pulling back the black scab from the knee to watch it bleed again. Pain is relative to need until the performance ends. Push as much air into your lungs as you can when someone else hurts another in front of you. Watch it unfold, extricated. Right there, people being hurt by other people long before we betrayed memory. Bodies in final exhale from a kerf overlap of sounds, and human weapons filling these animal hours without limit. I forgot to say that in her early years as an artist, she hurt herself a lot, or she had someone else hurt her. So, and I found that as a child, I found that disturbing and puzzling. And but
I love Marina Abramovic. I think she's just a fabulous artist, and I love when Ule comes after they haven't seen each other for 6 years to the Museum of Modern Art for their meeting.
Was that when they were both naked?
No. That's where she sits. She sits on a chair and greets, looks down between each guest, and then a new guest comes up from the museum. And she just looks at them. That's so original, I think.
There was a lot of incredible performance art during those years going on.
Yeah, I think I'll read this prose poem called called "Was into Space," and then we should probably each read just one more.
Okay.
A little background on this. So my sister Kelly was engaged to this wonderful young poet named Christian Kelleher, and he was on his way to the University of Indiana at Bloomington, and he I had the receipt he'd just shown me for my sister's engagement ring, and he was working on the highway on Interstate 90 with 5 other boys and a semi. Driver fell asleep and killed all 6 of these. So that's kind of floating behind this poem.
Fucking hell.
And yeah, it's something that's always haunted me, because then my sister married, of course, his best friend. She went out with all of his friends, and finally married his best friend. It was so. This poem is called "Was," W-A-S, into space. There was the time in August when the guests from the wedding down the street knocked by mistake at the door where the funeral reception was being held. We tried to ease their shame, but cars follow bunches of parked cars, and the small spaces between each, like that grief among us. And there was the long ago space beneath a bed, where sometimes the boy hid between a box of clothes and a rolled up rug, a safe space where toy Indians roamed among dust clouds. And there was the closing space he'd glimpsed between 2 joined bodies as he closed a door. And much later in the story, he continued closing the space between another body and his, a riding of sorts to nowhere, the same nowhere he was left with after she leapt toward a teaspoon of ashes he kept in a small plastic sock inside a silk one next to his socks, because his legs had no feet, and stayed put for a while till he decided to swim back and forth in another space, 80 laps, 2 miles, to distract him, till one snowy night he made a fire out back and could see the space between the lit flakes melting as he made the fire bigger, adding more cedar, wanting to toss her ashes back into the fire from which she'd arrived, to remake her space, letting it become mobile. See, they were there and here, both once and now, remembrance joining discovery, reaching across the years.
So I think I'm going to change my idea of the last poem. I think we need a little tiny uplift.
I think we need a
I've never written a funny poem. Very rarely written a happy poem. Although now that I'm screenwriting, I find that a lot of black humor is coming into play. Thank goodness. But anyway, this is the closest I get to something uplifting. Andy Goldsworthy. Do you know Andy Goldsworthy? Nature poet. He uses the natural world as his material, and then he just leaves the sculptures there to naturally dissolve or fall apart. And there's Theodore Redke was one of my first favorite poets. It's a quote from Theodore Redke. I climb out of my fear, the mind enters itself, and God the mind, and one is one, free in the tearing wind. Andy Goldsworthy, Sticks and Stones. And thank you, Quentin and Beyond Broke and everybody that's involved. I know how much work goes into this. And thank you, audience. You are alone. You are alone, naked in a forest, surrounded. Alone, surrounded by a live ossuary of trees, shed twig, spell of oval stone. You are separate from the forest, in a forest of small yet perpetuating sounds. No one will hear you breathe. You are alone, bare hands like large upcurling leaves, still soft from the falling. You shed your expression in the ground next to the rounding stone where the soil is breathing. From grain ends of self-bearing branches, light mows down on you in the forest, oncoming winds near words between its trees' teeth. Spell freefall memory far forward from your mind to make nothing happen, like those nothing spaces between the rooms you left behind, left alone to be alone, unaccounted for. No one can hurt you now. Your face, hands, the synonyms of leaves, hair caught combing a pine cone. Like one pulled potato, a child here alone, falling out of your house made from cut down trees. Thank you.
So I'll read one, right?
Yes,
To
please.
to end with. So Forest, Sticks and Stones. I love that poem, by the way. So this will be the last poem. You know, I've spent a lot of time in wilderness. I built my own house on 4 acres in Colorado with 3 other people.
Wow.
And I also lived on a wilderness ranch in the San Luis Valley, a 5,000 acre wilderness ranch for 6 months. There's no cell reception, anything. A little town outside a little town called Antonito, Colorado. So I'll close with this poem called The Life, a short poem. I have no house and live in the forest. I know your language, but no longer speak it, though I often hum, mule, or mimic the trill of birds. The cardinals I like best. 3 long silver notes, a temporary bridge spanning the air. Like you, perhaps, I buried a mother and father and now walk their vast terrace. I eat mushrooms, fish, and leave no footprints. I have no money or belongings, but make drawings in the sand. I am my own house, through whose windows and open doors you have glimpsed a deer or fox's gaze. And my sex is one green equal to the age of light. Thank you all. It's been so fun. It's so fun.
We didn't get to practice, but does anyone want to ask any questions?
Yeah, we could pretend it's AWP.
No questions? Oh, come on.
Well, there's no questions. Oh, go, please, Antonietta.
How did you figure to do this amazing way of delivering poetry? It's like,
Oh, well, it was kind of a last minute winging
Yeah,
it
but we're,
decision.
we're friends.
Yeah.
Elena and I love the same things, I think. We cooked a couple meals together, and I think Elena's a better cook than me. Because I don't chop things as finely and leave the stems in. But we also love visual art, and I taught at an art school for 8 years. And this is the cover of this book is a wonderful artist. When I was teaching at Ohio University, Ron Crutel, he now, we're actually giving a reading together at the museum at Colorado State University in April. But so I think we both have spent a lot of time around, visual artists, composers, and you were married to a rock and roller.
The rock and roller, yeah. I don't know if that qualifies me for anything, but I'm also just thinking, LA is such an amazing community. I mean, we've known each other for so long, although it's not as if we've seen that much of each other. But I think that there's this feeling in Los Angeles that after being here for a while, if you're, I mean, it's hard to get out and about, and there's so many things going on, and I always feel guilty that I'm missing a lot. But I think that there's still that feeling of community, and Beyond Baroque is definitely the hub, one of the hub places, and it has been for so many years, to bring people together and to show the incredible diversity that we have in our community of so many different types of writers. And
Absolutely. I just think that's so important.
Yeah.
What you guys do, and it's a vanishing species too. All these bookstores are going out of business, and So it has to be an exhibition space and a community library, and that's what this is.
And it's the opposite,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's the opposite of a jail. Is what
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're in a jail.
the jail.
Yeah,
The
right.
original city council chambers
Yeah.
and courtroom. Where people were sent.
Yeah.
People were sentenced there.
Yeah, so what's your name?
Zachary,
Zachary.
I just thought that the way you all complimented each other's works was kind of how you share social space.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
interesting to
Mhm.
kind of just be in that environment.
Thank you. Yeah.
Complimented work and readings. I really like the responses and the choices and the blending of works because the incredible synergy and complementary work of each other's art was just, it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think all art does that. I think that we have to recognize that we're and between the genres and between the arts, there's I think we're constantly, even if we don't acknowledge it, we're constantly dialoguing with all of this. And it, I guess it's both the good and bad, but I think if we formalize our recognition of that and hopefully it'll help us recognize our own humanity and
That's right.
and
Yeah. Do you want to take this question over there? Did you have a question?
Yeah.
do-
Do you find writing about grief transforms your experience of or relationship to it?
Uh, both of us, or
you go first.
I think the best writing about grief, it's something Wordsworth said. You have to step away from it. I think for a while it doesn't congeal right away, and I think when it does, of course it's cathartic to write about it, but I think a lot of the writing I've done about grief is not very good. I mean, some of these poems are metamorphoses of others. I write hundreds of bad poems all the time. I have huge folders of bad poems. No, I really do. I have junkyards of parts from bad poems that but I think it's it's important to keep writing and keep, as I was saying, these spaces. Grief is a space. Animals are a space. Homeless people are a space. Art is a space. And insects. All of these. Yeah.
I think that also, I mean, for me, language begins in the body, and
Absolutely.
it's always there, and it's always ever changing, and it's a great problem solving adventure. But likewise, some of the obviously the big questions in our lives, and I think that grief occupies the body. It never really goes away. It's just sort of moves around, and so when you're negotiating it, at least in your consciousness for a moment on the page, I can't say that it helps. Maybe it does, but it helps insofar as those the sort of greater questions that we have for our in our the deepest part of ourselves that will never go answered, but somehow at least having that dialogue as makes creates more space for it, and it changes it a little bit. Yeah, it does.
There's also the problem of the elegy. There's a wonderful one-line poem by W.S. Merwin called Elegy, and the poem is "Who would I show it to?" And so I think that's what I meant by the distance, that it has to accumulate other things in it other than just the one thing. That it's kind of like a laundry basket, keep throwing stuff.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a comment to something that you said, Elena,
Yeah.
about how grief moves around the body. And I think that writing a poem or anything about grief, grief doesn't have closure, as you were saying, but a poem can have closure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
For that moment when the poem about grief has closure, you feel a little better. And then you go back to just being in the
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, yes, yes. Wait, wait, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to jump the gun.
Sorry.
Yeah, and Mark, you mentioned that both of you write about art. You both have many metaphors constructed from works of art, and visual art. But I noticed with Elena, you had a lot of specificity in terms of artists who who your poems arose from thoughts that the works they created had given you or engendered in you. And I wondered if do you write also about art? I mean, is that something that you
In my essays,
yeah?
but I think anything. I mean,
I mean,
it's
John Ashbery obviously wrote
right.
about art.
I think it's just about I think being immersed in a subject is so much part about. Again, it's very physiological and it's very. So I allow myself like an actor, like a method actor. I become completely immersed and obsessed for that moment. That being said, though, now that I'm writing screenplays, I have no doubt that my relationship to language is changing and will change whatever the next book's going to be. But yeah.
I thought to say something that it did, what it did for me, because I've been to a lot of grief, but with the dwelling on the grief, there is more devastating because you don't know what to do with it. But when you can create that into art and imagery, compare that to beautiful things that are terrible, that shows us
Yeah.
grief in imagery, paintings. I think that there is a recognition and a way into that horizon. And that able to move
Yeah.
from one place to another. Sometimes you get just stuck in one place and
And giving it a new voice. Yeah.
that's reality. Thank you very much.
It's interesting how Elena's cover, it kind of recalls the Van Gogh's shoes too, which are really about grief. If you remember that Van Gogh's shoes, so they're brown shoes, but he reverses the heaven and earth. So the foreground is blue and this, what should be the sky, is brown. So it's really, Van Gogh's shoes is really an elegy of the peasant they're empty shoes, not like Bill Wegman's, the peasant is gone and the heaven and earth are reversed. So
And I do mention those shoes in the
yeah,
in the
I know,
Wegman
I
poem.
know, yeah.
Yeah, it's also an homage to my tomboy days. I only wore boys' clothes until I was almost 15. And,
Well, thank you all.
Yeah.
It was wonderful reading before
yeah,
you.
thank you,
and,
everybody. It's an intimate.
Thank you all for coming. We do have books for sale in the bookstore, so buy some, stick around, hang out. I'm sure our authors
It
will
was
sign.
fun. I'm going to buy you the first copy.
Oh, you don't have to do that.
Because this one's all, I've jazzed this one all up.